All in Sports Network. We love sports.
It is Thursday, October 17th here on All in Horns, your daily fix for all things Texas Longhorns, brought to you by Rogue Sports Network. I'm Tanner Carlson, along with Jake Jimerson. We have a very exciting show for you today with an awesome guest who we've been wanting to get on for on the show for a while now, as we prepare for probably the biggest game played in Austin since at least 2006, with the number one Texas Longhorns are hosting Ohio State almost a decade ago. So this is going to be a huge Saturday for us. Almost 2 decades ago. Yeah. So we're super excited about it, pumped up. We're going to try to get you all the content we possibly can. And Jake, how are you feeling going into this game?
Excited. I mean, I would say this is a bigger game than 2006, just because that year was coming off the national championship. Texas was probably a little bit high. I believe they were number two, with a brand new quarterback coming in Colt McCoy, who hadn't really done anything to that point in his first season starting. This is a much more proven Texas team. This is in the middle of the schedule versus the start of the year. And not only that, but it's two top 5 teams. Texas being number one for the first time in a long time. And with all the scouts and just the turnaround that Texas has had, this just feels like a monumental moment for the program. Being a conference game, first season in the SEC, this truly just feels like something special. Definitely the biggest matchup in Austin in our lifetimes, in my opinion.
Yeah, it feels that way. And Jake, we've got CJ Vogel with On Texas Football joining the show today. Following that, we're going to break down some big recruiting news, another 5-star committing to the University of Texas in the 2025 class. And then, hey, we might end the show with a little bit of basketball talk. Haven't been able to talk about the men's basketball team. So introducing to the show right now, CJ, how's it going, man? Oh, we got you muted.
Appreciate you fellas for having me on. I'm glad to be here. Let's talk some ball.
Yeah, let's do it, man. So first of all, your experience at the Red River game, it had to have been a fun one. We talked a little bit before we came onto the show. Just, hey, when Texas wins and in Dallas at the Cotton Bowl against OU, it's always a good weekend. What do you think attributed to Quinn's early struggles in that OU game? Was it rust? Was it a lack of confidence reading that OU defense, which gives you a lot of looks? They tend to shell a lot of defense of coverages before the play. Was that kind of a confusion thing for him? What have you heard, since that game?
Yeah, I think it was a combination of a few things, right? First, Quinn was sacked on the first play. I think maybe there were some jitters. I think maybe there were some, he was flustered a little bit, if you will, simply coming back, hasn't played in 3 weeks. And when you're hit on the first play after having a bit of a, oblique abdomen, whatever you want to call it, I'm sure that didn't sit with him, all too well in the pocket. Of course, it felt weird with Quinn in that first quarter. It felt like a quarterback that didn't trust his offensive line, which we've come to find out, you have a good offensive line. So as he got settled in and he started making some plays on the run, you started to see his confidence start to rise as that game progressed. Of course, the first quarter kind of took the headlines, and that's where you're sitting there saying, oh, okay, that was a pretty ugly game from Quinn. Is he going to be 100% for Georgia? And I believe he will be, but I do think it was mostly rust that attributed to it. And, and that big play to Isaiah Bond that he didn't connect on, he was pushed back in the pocket on, and a number of different things. It's a good defense. Let's not forget that. So
right.
Overall, he found his rhythm, and I think he'll be just fine this weekend.
Yeah, and coming out of that, it's interesting if you look in, previous years, coming out of this Oklahoma game, you're typically playing at Baylor, an Iowa State. It's a whole different feeling when all of a sudden you got Georgia coming in.
Right.
And so what do you kind of feel like the vibe is around the program right now, and kind of the confidence level coming out of that Oklahoma game, but knowing they got to turn around and you can't celebrate that Oklahoma game too long. You pretty much had to stop on Saturday because you have a much better football team coming into your house on Saturday.
Yeah, I think that was one of the big fears for me early in this season for Texas is, will they be able to get up, emotionally for both of these games? And we saw them in Dallas take care of business against Oklahoma. And because that game kind of got out of hand in that second half, right, you were able to throw in some key, backups, some key second and third stringers where you didn't have to play Anthony Hill 50 snaps. You didn't have to play Colin Simmons 40 snaps. You didn't have to play some of these key members of that Texas defense significant numbers of snaps, where you look at Georgia and you allowed 31 points in Mississippi State. I think that game was significantly closer, maybe a bit of a look-ahead spot for Georgia a week ago. But because of that, you're able to rest a lot, and then you're able to very easily say, okay, you took care of business in Dallas. Let's turn all of our focus ahead to a much better team, as you were saying, Jake, and let's make sure that our focus is on taking care of business and winning at home, as they've done very well over the last year and a half.
CJ, there's a lot of talk about how Sark has got Texas SEC ready. It kind of seems as though Kirby has alluded to this a little bit, but molding his team and kind of what resembles Georgia over the last 5 seasons or so. Is there any validity to that, or has Sark done it in a more unique way?
Well, I think Sark certainly wanted to build his team from the inside out, and we've seen that with the offensive line. We've seen that with Kelvin Banks, Cam Williams, DJ Campbell. You know, these guys coming in and being as impactful as they were immediately was Texas saying, yeah, we need immediate 4 or 5-star guys, and y'all are going to play. Y'all are going to be the focal point of our rebuild and restructuring of the Texas football program. And you started to see that a little bit, and you're seeing it more so in the 25 class on the defensive line as well. Obviously, Tavondre Sweat and Byron Murphy helped bridge Texas to where they were a year ago. Now it's Vernon Broughton, Alfred Collins kind of carrying that torch on the trenches. But Sark's doing it in his own way, in a sense, right? You know, I think with Georgia, what do you think of when you think Georgia football? It's the front 7. It's that defensive line. It's those linebackers. That defense in general is what kind of carries the torch for Georgia. For Texas and for Steve Sarkisian, you're seeing it now with Xavier Worthy gone, Jordan Whittington gone, A.D. Mitchell gone. Well, you got 6 guys right now that you can throw out there and trust that they'll make plays at the wide receiver spot while having one of the deeper, more experienced offensive lines in all of college football. So it starts from within, but Sark's got his own little twist on it, and it starts with the speed and playmaking offensively.
So you talked a little bit about the front 7. We've talked about Texas's offensive line. We talked about it a ton on our podcast. I played offensive line.
The
I love
offensive line guy.
Yeah. That's my favorite position to watch. But I want to talk about this secondary because I don't think they've been tested this year. I think we would all agree they haven't gone against a very competent passing offense to this point. What are kind of your expectations for this secondary? It seems like they're improved from last year. We certainly hope they're improved because that did cost them against Washington. Part of that was Penix playing out of his mind. But what do you kind of expect from this secondary going into this game? And what do you expect from this pass rush as well? Because I think those kind of work in tandem.
Yeah, for me, the biggest thing is that secondary is going to allow yards. They're probably going to allow points. Do they stay up? And that's not getting down because, you know, it's been all smooth sailing for the Texas secondary this year, right? They've not necessarily been beat for points this year. And I think that's going to be the big thing because Georgia's a good football team. Carson Beck's a great quarterback. Georgia's going to score points. What does that response look like if you're the Texas secondary? You know, are you able to come back that next drive, keep your head level, and play sound football? Communication has been the biggest friend of the Texas defense this entire season. You've not seen busts. You've not seen missed coverages. You've not seen wide receivers running scot-free wide open down the field, where in years past, for probably the last 15 years, really, you've seen that. And that's been the biggest takeaway for me defensively is, hey, whatever you want to say from an athletic standpoint, they're great. They're faster across the board. But more than anything, that communication has been superb. And I think that's the biggest takeaway that you can look to in the Texas secondary and say, okay, they've made that leap. Because, again, they're not the fastest. They're not the strongest. They're not the biggest. But what they do is talk and communicate very well, and that starts with Michael Taft, Jahdae Barron, Andrew Makuba. I think they've got a very strong group right now, and that's going to be the key for me in that secondary and that Texas-Georgia matchup.
Yeah. So going to Kirby's presser earlier this week, I think it was Monday presser. What do you know about this annual trip that Kirby and Sark go on? If you could be a fly on the wall, what do you think that they're talking about? What do you think those discussions sound like?
I'm sure they're both sharing stories about how Nick Saban used to cuss them out. And I mean, coming from the Saban tree, that I can't only imagine what kind of stories that they've got. But no, that was pretty unique, right? I didn't realize that they golfed together. I didn't realize they went on trips together. That's one of the cool things about Texas joining the SEC is I don't think Sarkisian's doing that with a Matt Campbell. I don't think Sark's doing that with a Chris Kleiman. And no, that's no disrespect to them, but Kirby Smart's, up in the conversation right now for being one of the top 3 coaches in all of college football. why would you not want to go pick his brain on a coach's trip and see what's going on, right? And of course, coming from the Saban tree a little bit, there's some familiarity there, and I'm sure they're sharing some funny stories about their time in Tuscaloosa.
Yeah, I'm sure. And my thing is too, is like, do you think that there's got to be like a, hey, if I'm throwing this defense, this is what the offense I'm going to throw at you is? Like, do you think those conversations are had now that they're actually opponents and they're in the same conference? They probably have to be a little bit careful in terms of giving away too many secrets. But I mean, not that they don't already probably know some of those things anyway.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm not entirely sure if they were sharing game plans on the 14th hole, but I would like to think that, there was probably some chirps of, I can't wait to hit you with a bunch to the field or whatever. And, good luck with this Mills concept. And maybe it could happen, but I feel like both of those coaches are pretty close to the vest in terms of what they release out to the public and especially to other coaching staffs.
Yeah.
So kind of sticking with this Sark versus Kirby matchup, we've seen Sark coach against Venables. We've seen him go against the Michigan defense as well this year. This Georgia defense, as great as Kirby Smart is, as great as this defense has been over the years, they do seem more vulnerable on the defensive side of the ball this year. How do you kind of see Texas attacking them in this game? And do you like the matchup of this Texas offense against their defense?
I actually love it. And that feels so weird to say right now coming into the year. Again, you expected if there's a number one team in the country, it would be Georgia. If there's a number one defense in this game, it would be Georgia. That's just off of historical trends. That's the way that they've recruited. Oddly and surprisingly enough, it's Texas that holds both of those titles right now. And I look at it, Georgia, what's their identity defensively? You look at it for Oklahoma, they take the ball away better than anybody in the country. Michigan, that front seven, you can compete with anybody in the country there. Georgia, they're good. This isn't to take away from the talent that they have, but what do they lean on right now that's better or the best in the country? I don't know. They're 110th in takeaways this year. They're 54th in tackles for loss. They're 79th in sacks. So they don't do a whole lot in terms of putting you behind the chains or taking the ball from you. And if that's the case and you're giving Quinn Ewers and this offense opportunities to gain yards on almost every play, I think you're going to have some struggles getting them off the field. We saw it in the first half against Alabama. How many points did they have? About 28 at halftime, and it was almost a complete blowout, right? Mm-hmm. That's going to be my biggest thing. And I think if Cam Williams and Kelvin Banks live up to that, quote unquote, first round billing that they're getting right now, Quinn's going to have a clean day. And if you give Quinn a clean day at home, I like your chances.
Yeah. This will be my last question for you. We'll get you out of here. Have there been any almost breaking news stories that you have come across covering the team, whether that be through press conferences or whatever, but they actually never came to fruition? Any just kind of murmurs or rumors covering the team that you can share with us?
Well, I don't know if I can go into the weeds of what's not been out there yet, but I tell you, there's, they keep injuries quiet. And right now, Texas is pretty close to full strength. You can obviously hear about and see the Twitter, whispers and rumors of, why guys aren't playing, why guys aren't living up to the billing. And in years past, that was a lot of stuff that didn't have to do with the field. And so right now, this team is very dialed in. They're taking the locker room approach of this is, our 85 scholarships versus the world. And they're doing a tremendous job of going in each week for that specific battle. There's nothing too crazy because eventually everything finds light one way or not. And you see it on social media, you see it on message boards, whatever it might be. There's nothing too crazy that comes to mind that hasn't been released down at some point previously. So as long as they keep it that way and keep most of their stuff in line in the locker room, you're going to be looking at a successful season for the Texas Longhorns this year.
Well, I also feel like Sark is pretty open with the media. I mean, he kind of says what's on his mind, which is definitely a change of pace than what we saw even with Mac Brown.
Yeah. Yeah, no, what's funny with Sark, if you go back and watch some of his pressers, and he'll drop you little breadcrumbs and say, I really like the opportunity for, Juan Davis this weekend. Sure enough, he's the biggest part of the Texas, focal plan or whatever you want to call it. It's funny. In retrospect, if you go back and it's like listening to a podcast a week after a game, with Sark, you hear it and you say, yeah, that makes sense why DeAndre Moore went for 5 and 180, right? That's one of those things he just kind of hints at and said, oh, yeah, it's a good week of practice. And he goes out and has a hell of a game.
And so my last question, and first of all, thank you again for coming on. I've listened to
Yeah.
On Texas Football for years, so I've followed your stuff. So it's great to have you on, and check out On Texas Football. They're another great Texas podcast. But there hasn't really been any weaknesses so far that have showed up for this Texas team, other than maybe just beating themselves a little bit at times. Do you think there's a weakness that hasn't showed itself yet and will start to show itself? Not necessarily a fatal weakness, but something that they're going to have to kind of fix as it starts to get closer, to the end of the season and into hopefully the playoffs.
I think you hit the nail on the head there, right? They've kind of beat themselves early in games against Oklahoma, against Mississippi State. There's been stagnant offense, and that's from offensive penalties. That's from false starts. We saw it at Michigan on the first drive. We've seen turnovers, completely halt possessions. If Texas can take that away, I don't know what the weakness is offensively. You can maybe point to the inside zone run, the between the tackles ground, but Trey Wisner's turned into a heck of a running back when it comes to finding loose slivers, breaking tackles and creating explosive plays. Who would have thought that would be the case coming into the year? Certainly it wasn't me, but he surprised the hell out of me right now. And Texas is looking at a really, really good 1-2 punch in the running back room right now. Defensively, again, I thought it was maybe going to be that run defense coming into the year, but if Texas plays the way that we expect them to play offensively, teams are not going to be able to keep up with a Quinn Ewers-led offense by running the football the entire drive. And I thought that's what Mississippi State wanted to do. When Texas got up by 2 scores and they had to trust their freshman quarterback, then you saw that Texas pass rush pin its ears back with Colin Simmons and Barron Sorrell and Anthony Hill. And they got after the quarterback, right? So if that's the way that Texas is able to play games moving forward by getting up by 2 scores, forcing teams to throw the football, I don't know what that weakness is because they're not going to have time to throw. And when they do, these are some really good Texas defensive backs that are ready to get their hands on some footballs.
All right, man, before we let you go, anything you got going on Texas Football that you want to share with us? Where can people find you, social media handles, all that, and then also give a final prediction if you want to.
Yeah, absolutely. You can find us at ontexasfootball.com. We'll have plenty of updates on recruiting. I know it's a big, big recruiting weekend for the Texas Longhorns. So exciting news there. We'll have it all covered there. And on Twitter at CJVogel_OTF. I like Texas by 10. And I think that sounds crazy. I don't know. Maybe that's kind of indicative of how the Vegas line movement's been looking, as it's up to about 5-point favorite now. But somewhere in that 34-24 range. I like 37-24 kind of. I like Texas in this game pretty handsomely.
Well, thanks, CJ, man. We definitely appreciate it. Jake, anything else you want to add?
No, just thank you for coming on, and check out On Texas Football, and we appreciate them, letting you come on our show as we're starting to grow.
I appreciate you fellas for having me. This was a blast.
Awesome. We'll definitely have CJ on again for sure if he wants to. We're not going to force his hand, but yeah, definitely a good time having CJ on. And Jake, we are speaking on recruiting. Big news came out earlier yesterday afternoon. Was moved to a 5-star on 3 recruiting rankings. Pleasant Grove edge Lance Jackson. Talk a little bit about what he provides. Texas now has 4 5-stars committed, with 2 more possible signings, with defensive lineman Justice Terry and the athlete who is going to be a wide receiver, Michael Terry III.
Yeah, I think he got listed as a 5-star earlier this season by On3, and we kind of briefly talked about it, if I recall correctly. And I'd mentioned he should have been a 5-star last year, and that's what I'm going to say again. Here's a guy, another Chris Collinsworth, that he is an elite edge prospect, and he's going to have a chance to come in and get some playing time next year as a freshman, and only really talented special players get those chances right now at Texas. That's why Colin Simmons is getting time as a freshman. That's why Ryan Wingo is getting time as a freshman. And even some of the other guys who are getting limited playing time, like a Ty Anthony Smith, who's looked very good when he's been on the field. They're getting playing time because they are special players that are going to be superstars for Texas, if they aren't already are, in the case of maybe a Colin Simmons and a Ryan Wingo. I'm not saying he will be as good as Colin Simmons. He is not that level of prospect, but he is a 5-star edge. He is explosive off the edge. He has very good speed. He has a plethora of moves he can use. He makes high school tackles look silly. And he has a game and a size that is going to translate to the college level. And once he gets some of that college weight room program in him, he is going to be an absolute monster. This edge room for Texas is quickly becoming a huge strength of this team, and it is another position group where Sarkisian has proven when he finds a weakness, he does everything in his power to improve it and to make sure they are getting the talent that they need to compete for national titles.
Lance Jackson is ranked, according to On3, their 5-star rankings, as the number 26 overall player and the number 26 5-star, obviously. Texas has commits from the number 9 player overall, safety Jonah Williams, as well as the number 21 overall player, wide receiver Kalik Lockett, and as well as the number 29 overall player as well, wide receiver Jamie French. And so now with 4 5-stars committed to the 2025 class, you could still again have 2 more added to that list, as Justice Terry, defensive lineman, probably sitting at around an 80-85% commitment to Georgia currently, but will be at DKR on Saturday night. So a huge opportunity for this coaching staff to show him around, to say, hey, look, your competitors are in our building, and we're going to show you every reason why you should pick the Texas Longhorns. And then with Michael Terry III, the wide receiver, he's like at a 90%. I mean, he's very highly, projected to go to and commit to the Longhorns. So Texas really looking at possibly 5 5-stars for this 25 class. That would tie Alabama for most in the country. Currently sitting at 4 would put Texas at number 2. Ohio State and Oregon also have 3. And there's maybe about 6, 7, 8 more 5-stars out there that have not committed and made their decisions yet. So those numbers could be skewed. But as of right now, the most information we can give you is currently sitting right there.
Yeah. And I mean, I kind of mentioned this, but it's a chance for Texas to get a number 1 class. And there's another borderline 5-star that Texas is still fighting for. He's currently committed to Ohio State, but he's coming in for this game, and that's Riley Pettijohn. Most Texas fans are going to be very aware of this name and this player. And that's someone who Texas is still pursuing heavily. Seemed like he was trending towards Texas, and then the Ohio State commitment kind of surprised people. And Texas has been pretty good at flipping those, and they're certainly giving their best effort here. And then on Justice Terry, one thing I wanted to touch on is originally when this visit got announced, it was an unofficial visit. It moved up to an official visit. And so that to me was where I was like, okay, this is real. They're going to really get a chance to take a swing at this guy. And this is a guy who we did not even have on our radars a few weeks ago. Even a week ago. And even when this became an unofficial visit, I was like, okay, so he's really just going to see Georgia's biggest game. But now it feels like he's like, okay, Texas showing interest. Probably he is a guy who would probably get early playing time immediately as a freshman, especially at that position for Texas. And Kenny Baker is seemingly starting to really connect with some of these recruits, and that is from the Georgia area. That is his roots. That is one of the reasons Sarkisian sought after him. And I know some people are freaking out, his first 6 weeks on the job, he didn't get big recruits. He flipped the one recruit everyone freaked out about in Sharma. And it seems like they're going to put together a pretty good defensive tackle class at the end of the day. And I have really high hopes for Kenny Baker. I think the defensive tackles have probably performed a little bit above their talent level to this point this year. Jermaine Lowell is a guy who I think has really played well. I'm very high on Kenny Baker. I think he's going to be a really good defensive tackle coach for Texas.
Yeah, Jake, when you're a guy like Justice Terry and you get to see an opportunity of lining up inside next to a guy like Colin Simmons, that's got to be enticing.
And with guy Anthony Hill behind you. With
a guy like
Leona
Anthony
LaFell.
Hill, and then even an Ethan Burke, side by side. And I know Georgia, yes, also has the caliber of talent on their defense as well. But whenever you see a guy like Colin Simmons or you see a guy like Anthony Hill flying around like that, you're like, man, that could really open up some opportunities to allow me to make more plays.
Yeah, and even coming up the pipeline, I am very excited about Anthony Smith. I think he's going to be a stud starting next year.
Mm.
Right now, he has the football IQ to play the position at a very high level. He just needs to put on some muscle mass and some speed. So even the idea of playing like with a guy like him, who you see him come in, in second halves right now when Texas is up big and just show flashes every time. These defensive tackles, I'm sure they look at those guys because you want to have good linebackers behind you, because good linebackers typically will put a spotlight on good defensive tackle play because they're the ones who are opening it up for them, kind of like an offensive line opens it up for a running back or a quarterback.
All right, Jake. Well, let's go ahead and move toward talking about the Texas Longhorns men's basketball team. We've got about 5 minutes remaining left in our show. They come in on the first preseason rankings released by the AP poll at number 19. This roster going into the SEC for the first time, it's going to be a little bit different, going to be a little bit unique. They open up with Ohio State this year. It's going to be a very fun season, Jake. Where do you see this Texas Longhorn basketball team under Rodney Terry?
I mean, I have big hopes for this year's team. I think this year's team should be better than last year's, and they're playing in the SEC, which is just not as strong as the Big 12 in basketball. This is the one kind of sports example in moving from the Big 12 to the SEC where it seems like things are going to get a little bit easier, because baseball is going to be a whole heck of a lot harder, and football is definitely a step up as well. And so I have big expectations for this team. They need to do better than they did last year. And I think part of that is going to be, can Rodney Terry, and you and I have talked about this, can he find the right rotations? Because this team has a boatload of talent that have already proven themselves at the college level. I think they have 5 guys who have averaged in double digits in the last at least year, if not more, for some of them. And then you have a 5-star talent coming in who's going to be a one and done, one of the most skilled scorers Texas is going to have coming in as a freshman in a very long time, in Trey Johnson. And so for me, this team needs to be competing to win an SEC championship. They need to finish top 3 in the standings, and they need to be probably around a top 4, at worst top 5 seed in the tournament this year, and at least make a Sweet 16 run. I get a little ahead of myself, but that's just kind of my high level season expectations going into things.
We've seen Rodney Terry perform in the tournament before. He's led this team to an Elite Eight appearance, won a game last season, and got to the second round. This Rodney Terry led Longhorn team, I think a lot of people are like, okay, he's great with recruiting. He's great with getting the talent to Texas, whether that be through the transfer portal or through recruits. It's getting these guys to mesh and play well together, which I think is a completely different aspect to college basketball than it is any other sport, because there are the one and dones. You could have a team full of 5 freshmen come in and then not see those players return at all. We've seen that with Kentucky a couple of times. We've seen that with Kansas a couple of times. We've seen that happen at the college basketball ranks. And so these guys don't have a lot of time to gel and play well together and learn each other's tendencies very much. That's on coaching to get that job done. Rodney Terry has not been able to do that come regular season. Now, this team was a little bit above 20 wins. What were they? 21 wins a season ago, 22 wins. And this roster, is much better than last year's team in what should be a more favorable conference in terms of competing within that conference outside of the Big 12. This team has to be at 25, 26, 27 wins, like you said, Jake, approaching and then winning inside the conference tournament. A one and done within the conference tournament doesn't do you any good either, like we saw a season ago against Kansas State. Now, that was a good Kansas State team, but can't let that happen.
Yeah, they ended the year 23-11 last year, but 9-9 in conference.
That's bad.
To me, they got to avoid losing to bad teams, especially at home. They had some bad losses at home last year. Obviously, the UCF game is the one that really stands out. That was where Rodney Terry did the worst thing he's done as a head coach, which was complaining about the horns down. And so you got to avoid that this year. You got to protect home court. Texas finally has a home court to be proud of. So you got to win the games that you're supposed to win. And that's what I want to see from him. Because if they do that this year, they'll end up at least top 3 or top 4 in the SEC just by winning games that they're supposed to win. And so that not only consistency in the regular season, but winning, just not losing those games you shouldn't lose, and then being able to win some games against those top opponents. They came close a lot last year. They had a close game against Houston. They had close games against Kansas. They had, a lot of close losses to good teams, and including to Tennessee to go to the Sweet 16. They ended up losing that game by 4. They certainly had a chance down the stretch, but turnovers were costly, and just stretches where they don't score, mainly because of the lineup that is chosen to be put in, not having good enough scores in it. That to me is what I'm going to be watching is he able to adjust whenever he puts a lineup out there, they don't score well. Can he figure that out in the season and make adjustments and go, okay, I can't put that group of 5 out there. I have to mix and match differently.
Yeah, and then you've got guys transferring in, the Julian Larry from Indiana State. You've got Kaluma, who should be a starter this season, along with that 5-star talent that you mentioned in Trey Johnson. And
Jordan
then you got
Pope
guys
as well.
and Jordan Pope. Yeah, Jordan Pope. And then you've got a guy like Shindle Weaver, who we were clamoring for more minutes, a starting role very early on last season. Didn't get to see that. Now, yes, he kind of wanted Rodney Terry's plans for Weaver was to be kind of that 6-man coming off the bench. He's going to be your starter. He's got to be a starter this year, just in terms of that energizer and that kind of leader. I would think that he's probably one of the more veteran led players that has some sort of attributes under his belt, leading this Longhorn team in terms of the culture and what Rodney Terry wants to implement within the locker room in that leadership role. So it should be an exciting year, Jake. Starting off at number 19, I think that's a good spot for Texas. I think that's a fair spot for Texas. Not upset whether it be too high, too low. I think that's a good way to start the season. You start off with Ohio State, and then you've got a lot of dud cupcake games that, like you said, you have to win those games before you start looking ahead at conference play.
Yeah, and they do have a couple good non-conference games that I think Texas fans should just kind of have on their radar, because the season is approaching quickly. It starts in just about half a month on November 4th. But so that November 4th, Ohio State, November 21st against Syracuse, December 8th against UConn, and then they open conference play at A&M. So that'll be a fun way. And A&M is ranked 13th to start the year, so that should be a fun way to open up that rivalry this year. So those are kind of the games that I think Longhorn fans should be aware of, and make sure they watch those games, because those are going to start to give you an idea of what this team is going to look like as they start to get into the conference schedule.
Well, that's going to do it for our show, Jake. We appreciate CJ Vogel for joining us from On Texas Football. Go give him a follow. He's a great follow. He puts out some really good content, whether that be on X or on YouTube with On Texas Football. We appreciate them as well for allowing him to come onto our show. We're not competitors. We're all part of the Longhorn family right here. And so, Jake, that's going to do it for our show. We've got Texas, Georgia coming up. These shows release at noon Tuesday through Friday, and then our immediate reaction following the games on Saturday. For Jacob Jimerson, I'm Tanner Carlson. You are getting your daily fix for all things Texas Longhorns right here on All In Horns, brought to you by Rogue Sports Network. And as always, hook 'em.
All in Sports Network. We love sports.